tell us your name and your role.
My name is Christine King. I'm representing Sheffield Tree Action Groups. Until very recently I was co-chair of the group. But now I've stood down in order to concentrate on the Street Tree Strategy Partnership work.
Thank you very much indeed, and thanks again for coming to talk to us today. I have just got a few introductory remarks to make. I'm saying this to everybody who's kind enough to come and have this conversation with me, so please don't take anything particularly about you about why I'm saying these things. Firstly, just to confirm that we're broadcasting and recording this, and people will be able to watch it later on. You understand that? That's okay?
Yes.
Good. Now, as you know very well, the dispute generated lots of stress and anxiety and emotion, and we are having to be careful in the way we conduct this part of my inquiry, these public discussions, that we don't inadvertently do anything that might be defamatory or libelous, or that we don't inadvertently put into the public domain sensitive personal information about somebody which they're entitled to have privacy for under data protection laws. I don't expect us to run into that problem in the conversation you and I are about to have, but just to let you know, if I get concerned we may be getting close there, I will let you know. And if I feel that we're unable to resolve the question, unable to resolve the issue, I will have to stop the hearing, just so you're aware. So in a minute I'm going to give you a chance to say whatever you'd like to say at the beginning, and then we sent you in advance a list of topics to discuss. I'm sorry we sent you quite a long list of topics, and we'll work our way through them, and then at the end we'll give you a chance to say anything else you'd like to tell us. Is that all okay?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Okay, Christine, so please tell us what you'd like to say by way of introductory remarks.
Okay. Some 15 years ago, Sheffield City Council made the decision to fell and replace many of the city's street trees. When the PFI contract started, this was explicitly half of the street trees, 17,500 in all, mostly over a 15 to 20 year period. This was a mistake in terms of scale and timing, and ignored the significant benefits that the mature street trees provide. But what made this such a significant event in the city's history was the way the council reacted to being told by experts that this was wrong, and by residents that this was not what they wanted. Anyone can make a mistake, but this reaction of descending into an ever-escalating cycle of lies, misdirection and aggression, rather than listen and reflect, has caused huge damage to the community as a result. Okay,
thank you very much indeed. So the first thing I want to ask you is how you first became aware of the removal of street trees and what your concerns were initially.
Well, for me it was as early as early 2014 when the Sheffield Star started reporting stories of street tree removal. Stories of people leaving a tree-lined street to go to work and returning to a line of stumps. And it was clear, and it became clear that it was widespread, but I didn't know how to find out more. I mean, it was clear from the beginning that it was just too large on a scale to be justified.
Okay. So how did you become involved in groups that were concerned about this and about what was going on?
Well, I disagreed with what was happening, but I didn't know what to do or how to find out more. And I felt despair about that. I genuinely didn't know what to do. So as soon as I became aware of STAG, the Sheffield Tree Action Groups, I joined. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I didn't think I could live with myself if I did nothing. So I joined my local group, and what we started off doing was talking to people about the tree felling programme, so they understood, putting the yellow ribbons on trees and asking people to sign the petition for the Riverlyn Valley Road fellings, which was my area.
Okay, very good, thank you very much. Is there anything else you can tell us about how groups were formed and how they were organised, and how the local groups started to collaborate across the city, and then how that led to the formation of the Sheffield Tree Action Groups?
That aspect of it is before my time, and I think you've probably got more information than I do about that, but I did ask some people. So what I'm being told is Sheffield City Council met with Transition Sheffield in 2012 and explained that half the street trees would be felled. Apparently this information was shared on the Transition website, and I'm told it was publicly communicated, but most of the public missed this. Now, a number of residents became involved in around 2014, following probably the same thing as me. They saw in the papers, saw this large-scale thing happening, and raised concerns with the cabinet member responsible, also sending information to various wildlife trusts and other national NGOs, but they didn't get a lot of response from that. Moving on to 2015, SORT, Save Our Roadside Trees, is an early group working on the petition for Rustlings Road and their campaign. And although they're primarily associated with Rustlings Road, the principles of good tree management are actually applicable to all the trees in Sheffield. Meanwhile, different campaign groups were starting off all over the city. And eventually they formed, like later in the year, to form the coalition, which is Sheffield Tree Action Groups. And I don't know quite how it happened. I think it's just organic. People are in a group and they learn about another group, and then they just combine forces because we're all stronger together.
Okay, very good. That's very clear. Thank you. So you've just told us how and with who local groups raise concerns. Maybe you could say a little bit more about what at that stage you and the groups you were involved with were trying to achieve.
We wanted the council to reconsider what they were doing, this decision they'd made, and apply proper tree management principles to the street trees. I mean, and obviously also to remove this contract obligation to fell half the trees, because that's completely at odds with proper tree management. We wanted a proper appraisal of street trees and intelligent working around them to resolve historical issues with the pavement. I mean, you know, we wanted our trees to be looked after using best practice. And I mean, one of the mechanisms we used was petitions, because a petition of a certain size would have to be debated in the council chamber. And we made an early decision to, rather than presenting one petition for Sheffield street trees, to break them down into different roads. So we had a series of petitions, so we were able to debate and move on from what we learned.
Yeah, okay. And what kind of response did you get in this phase, this relatively early phase, from the concerns you were raising? What kind of response did you get from the council, Amy and others?
Well, in the early days I was just what you call an ordinary campaigner. I wasn't on the steering group at that time, so all I had was information that was filtered down from the local area reps for it. So I don't know at that level what was happening. As an ordinary campaigner, I wasn't aware of any meaningful response.
Okay.
So, you know, I'm sure that there were talks and conversations happening, but what was also happening was felling was just continuing.
Right. So in that sense, because the tree removals, the fellings were still continuing, that you were sort of unsatisfied to the extent you got a response. So in the light of that, from what you remember, how did discussions among campaigners then evolve in 2015, by which point there started to be the emergence of the things happening on the streets, the non-violent direct action, and also discussions of legal action started. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that, and maybe, if you can, just about the discussions or the process by which the campaigners moved towards legal action.
Well, as I say, I had no sense that the council was prepared to listen and act on that listening. I mean, Amy were bound by the contract. I don't think they were in a strong position to challenge us as we thought at that time. So my first direct, I don't know what the word, communication, if you like, with the council was when I attended the first council meeting that I'd ever gone to see the Riverlyn Valley Road petition being presented. And I was shocked by the behaviour of the majority party's councillors. They were factional, openly contentious and aggressive, not just to the tree campaigners, but in fact to all the public representations made that day. I felt that they were arrogant, complacent in their majority, and that once they'd made a decision, they had no intention of changing it. So in the local meetings, the steering group representatives started talking about the need to stand under trees to protect them and how we would do it. So clearly they weren't getting positive signs in their private communications. I mean, nobody wanted to take to the streets. I mean, everyone understood that the only resolution would come from talking, but we couldn't get to council to either listen or talk. So in the end, it came down to making our presence felt. I mean, with regard to the judicial review, that's before my time on the steering group. So I'm going to rely on other people to talk more about that.
Okay, no, that's fine. Is there anything at all you'd like to say about what you understood campaigners hope to achieve through the judicial review, or anything you want to say about, you know, what you know or heard about the evidence presented, the outcome of the case, how you thought the council would react? Anything you'd like to tell us on that would be fine. You don't have to say anything on that if you don't want to.
Well, from memory, it was about asking for an environmental impact assessment or something similar on street trees, because the impact of removing a whole street's worth of trees is huge.
Yes.
In many ways. So I remember that. I did go to the sessions in London, and whilst not being involved in the steering group, my opinion was that what the council's representatives were saying was that it wasn't likely to be true. I can't remember every fine details, but I remember listening to it and thinking, I just don't believe this. Now, I wasn't surprised at the result, because I think there's an unspoken feeling that a council would be doing the right thing. And in fact, that's what we found when we tried to challenge the council, which was to say, there's no one to go to. So, as I say, because there's this feeling that a council is acting in the best interest all the time, then we were presented as people who weren't realistic in our aims. So we lost, and the council trotted this out on a regular basis. They've won in the High Court and therefore had a mandate to fell.
Okay. As you know, the council started in late 2015 and took forward into 2016 the creation of an independent tree panel. Do you have any view about what they did there and how it worked?
Well, when I saw in the terms of reference that the council wasn't bound in any way to act on the recommendations, I knew that it was a paper exercise at that point. And as an analyst, my view on the survey itself was that it was an exceptionally poorly designed piece of work that was badly implemented, and the results were misinterpreted as well. So the whole thing was poor, basically. In terms of the results, the way it worked was if the independent tree panel said a tree should be felled, then the council always backed that decision. When he said a tree could be saved, in almost all cases, they rejected it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
And in the end, what this did was actually increase people's anger, because the results would be published on the website, and then people would think that their tree was saved, because this panel that the council had created said it was safe, and then they would find it was still on the felling list.
And so because the council had set something up and the panel made recommendations, the fact that the council then often failed to agree with the recommendations, that added to people's disenchantment and concern, and you said anger about what was going on. Have I understood that?
Yes, people felt that they were being lied to and tricked.
Yes, okay, I understand. As you know, one of the most high-profile and controversial things that happened during the course of the dispute was what happened on Rustlings Road in November 2016, and I just wanted to ask for your views on that, including anything you want to tell us about the roles played by the council and Amy, the police, and anyone else you want to mention.
Well, the council told the police that the trees were dangerous and that the protesters represented an imminent danger by preventing these trees from being removed. This was not true. So this precipitated a coordinated night raid on the trees, with people being woken up in the middle of the night and told to move their cars or face arrest. Several people were arrested, although the cases were subsequently dropped. In the night, while the trees were being felled, the council's website refreshed to upload the independent tree panel report, which said that none of the trees was a significant threat. So it's impossible to believe that they had the planning meetings the month before to plan this with Amy and the police without being aware of this fact.
Okay. So, what in fact was the effect in terms of how campaigners responded to what happened on Rustlings Road? What did it lead people to think or do?
Well, I'm told that there was a prologue to this, and that's the arrest of 2 campaigners on Marden Road using anti-trade union legislation, and that these early arrests were intended to intimidate and deter people from taking direct action on what they were planning to do next. My view on Rustlings Road is that the Rustlings Road event was an act of immense and deliberate aggression. I believe that the council's intent was to end the dispute by slapping protesters down so hard that they never got up. And the events of that night were so traumatic that for some people this was true, as some people were unable to carry on as before. Pitching up against your own council is already stressful and exhausting, and it just uses people up. But what this did do was comprehensively destroy any belief that the council was acting in a reasonable and honourable way, and the membership of Stag doubled in less than a week. It was clear that Salt and Stag's factual evidence-based arguments were being ignored, and the number of people prepared to take to the streets and take non-violent direct action to physically prevent trees from being removed increased. I don't think that anybody involved thought that MVD alone would stop what was happening. But having a conversation about how all this is perhaps a bad idea is pointless if it doesn't take place until after the trees are gone.
Okay, I understand. As you know, in 2017, the council decided to take out the injunction against campaigners and protesters, and I wanted to ask how you felt about that decision, and also how the actions of people who were opposing what the council was doing evolved in the light of the injunction, and also some of the things that were related to the injunction, like the undertakings, for example.
Well, it was bad, but it was predictable, given what had gone before. It did have the effect of reducing the activity of some campaigners, but others stepped up and took their place. It was worse for those who signed the undertakings, as these were far more strict than the injunction itself. On the day the injunction went live, we thought that the council Amy would do something very high profile to rub it in. So we weren't able to prevent barriers from being created according to the injunction, but there wasn't anything to say that we couldn't prevent crews from leaving the depot, so we blockaded Amy's Olive Grove depot for the day. And to be honest, that was a moment of light relief. And even one of the Amy workers came out to say, well, you really got us this time, we weren't expecting this. So that night the tip was apart all over the city, but we didn't go back because we knew it wouldn't work 2 days in a row. After the injunction, the council and Amy were successful initially, but we worked out how to get around the injunction, and felling slowed again, and this became a pattern. They would throw something at us and it would work for a while, and then we'd work out how to get around it. For example, as the injunction only applied to the highway, if the householder allowed it, we could stand in gardens and stand under the crown of the tree and prevent it from being felled. The council responded by allowing crews to hand saw what's called the oversail, the part which overhangs the public park or the garden, at night, even though after Rustlings Road they publicly said that they wouldn't fell before 7 a.m. So that we had night patrols, people driving around in the middle of the night, like the likely streets as early as 4 a.m. to try and catch the crews at it. And sometimes we were successful, sometimes we were not. So, what was pushing people today to be up all night and then go to work and really long hours standing against the side of the road, even if no crews came, day after day after day, was a really strong sense of injustice, that this was wrong. It was long, it was difficult, it was tiring, but we just felt what was happening was wrong.
Okay.
And it felt surreal to me. I'd wake up one morning, it felt like there were two different cities. There was one where people were going to work, to school, just as normal, and there was this dystopian other where people were getting up, say, all hours of the day and night to defend their trees, wondering whether we were going to make it through the day without arrest or injury, or whether trees would be lost.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Okay. I want to ask you if there were things that campaigners did in 2017 that you're aware of to try to seek an end to the dispute.
It's more of the same. We were just trying to talk to council. We signalled our willingness to talk, whilst also signalled our intention to continue to fight. I mean, that was all we did. And it became a battle of the unstoppable force against the immovable object, with the Amy Tree crews stuck in the middle.
Right. Okay. One of the things that also happened was that people from outside Sheffield, including central government, became involved and started to talk about this. Could you tell us your perspective on that, or how the campaign tried to enlist help of others, including central government?
Well, we used all communication routes. We knew how to gain support. Local newspapers, national newspapers, especially but not exclusively the Guardian, the Yorkshire Post were helpful at a regional level. We used our Twitter feed to post the message. At one point we had Bianca Jagger with like 12 million followers retweeting our tweet. I mean, members with high-level access use this to lobby senior government officials directly. Things like the Olive Grove depot, because the media won't post the same story twice, so we were thinking of different ways to be creative in keeping this story live in people's minds. So we just everything we could think of, we tried.
Okay. As you know, following the injunction, later in 2017 and in 2018, the council decided to pursue committal proceedings against a number of people who they alleged had breached the injunction. So I wonder if you want to tell us anything about your views on that, and also how campaigners and protesters then further evolved their approach in the light of what the council were doing on the committal proceedings.
I thought that their entire policy was crush the opposition, and that this was just a continuation of it. Given that fines or a warning are also remedies for breach of injunction, for the council to choose and pursue committal to prison is, in my opinion, an act of naked aggression. Rather than rethink an environmentally damaging, unpopular policy denounced by experts in the field, they opted to try to criminalise and imprison opponents. I don't think there's any excuse for this behaviour.
Okay. During the course of 2017 and then into 2018, the dispute escalated and the tactics used by the council and Amy evolved. And I wonder if you can tell us how campaigners and protesters reacted to that, including what people thought about the evolving role of the police.
Well, it's the same as before. It was the cat and mouse game, or whatever they did. We try and work around. We just were always looking for that gap in it. Because initially the injunction was successful until we spotted a loophole in that a safety zone was defined as a continuous ring of barriers, but the crews were using pupils' boundaries. So then people started standing under them with impunity on the grounds that it wasn't actually against the injunction, which confused the opposition for a while. But then in the court cases, that loophole was closed. So then it became people who were brave enough to actually climb in full knowledge of the fact that they were completely breaking the injunction, and they were just heavily disguised, and we looked after them, made sure they got escape routes and this sort of thing. The next escalation was the security guards. When they arrived, that was a difficult time, and we were appalled by the way that the police ignored them inflicting pain on people so they'd let go. We didn't feel the police were in any way impartial. And again, this was a very difficult time, but what was driving people on was this strong sense of injustice that actually one of these escalations increased people's sense of purpose, that we needed to keep going, because it was not only wrong, it was more wrong, and
right.
More wrong and more.
So what you're saying is the effect of, I want to check I've understood what you said correctly. I think what you said is the effect of these ratcheting up of measures was in fact to make campaigners and protesters even more determined. The effect wasn't to reduce people's determination, it was to amplify. Is that what you said?
Yes, I think it did. Obviously those people that did that needed to be very, very strong-minded and brave in order to do it, but that was what it was. The harder they hit us, the stronger we felt about it.
Right.
That we were not going to back down.
Right, okay, yeah, that's clear, I understand. As you know, in the spring of 2018, the council decided to think about a different approach. There was a pause to the fellings tree replacement programme was announced on the 26th of March, I think. There'd been earlier pauses for operational reasons, but there was a pause announced on the 26th of March. And I wonder if you have any theory or hypothesis about why it was that the council then decided to take a different approach.
Well, by that point, trees were being felled very slowly, as it involved large numbers of security, police and crews that should have been doing other work, putting all these huge barriers up. It was costing Amy a fortune, and I'm pretty soon that they would have stopped sooner if they'd been allowed to. The very last week, third week of March 2018, in the end, descended into chaos really. The arrests, injury, 3 people being arrested for possession and use of musical instruments, or they were called public order offences. I think the thing that finally stopped it was the Forestry Commission announcing that they intended to investigate Sheffield City Council for felling without a felling licence. And people had been trying for years to get the Forestry Commission to engage on this matter, but finally we were successful. And at this point, that ceased felling, because if the council were to be found guilty on this, the fines for it are considerable. And as they didn't seem to be sure on that, they wouldn't have wanted the fines to be even higher, so it stopped. Now, Amy had already given a proposal to the council to save at least some of the remaining 300 trees from the 6,000 they wanted to fell in the first 5-year period. And this pause gave them the opportunity to put their proposal to the council and get the council to agree it. And for us, we didn't know whether it would restart or not. We just rested, thought about our plans, how we were going to, what they might do, how we were going to counter it. But as time went on and they felt it didn't restart, and hope started to creep in.
Okay, thank you. So then, by the middle of 2018, there were discussions underway about a kind of mediation process. So what can you tell us about how that process was conducted and pursued?
Well, we were informed by the council that the council of Amy had a proposal that they wanted to put to us. Now, we suggested that it would be a good idea if we were involved in that proposal, pointing out that it wasn't efficient if they gave it to us and we said none of that works, but they won't mind to take that up. So, but we were informed of the dates of the hearing and we were given an opportunity to comment on the mediator and the facilitator that the council was suggesting, which we agreed. So we put forward our case, meeting for the first time in late September 2018. Now, we were told to put our case in to the council in good time, and we did, expecting to receive the council's. We didn't get the council's and Amy's joint proposal until it was presented to us in the meeting. I'll be honest, we were not even very impressed by that, but we weren't surprised either.
Okay. Can you tell us what the campaigners' most important objectives were in those mediation talks? What did you want to achieve in them?
We went in with 3 objectives, which I tend to think of as being past, present and future. That the present, if you like, that the current felling programme should cease and that the remaining 300 trees be subjected to a proper method of appraisal so that we could be sure that they really were the last resort and they really were impossible to fix as had been claimed. To deal with the future, we wanted an exemplary street tree strategy to make sure that street trees were properly managed so this situation couldn't ever happen again, because it would be at odds with it. And dealing with the past, we wanted an inquiry as to how this had all happened.
Okay, which is what we're doing now.
Yes, yes. Again, to prevent a recurrence, in terms of understanding what had gone wrong.
Okay, all right, good. That's very clear in terms of your objectives. So, I think in December 2018, there was then a declaration which was agreed jointly between the campaigners, the council, and Amy. What did you think overall about the declaration? Your overall views on the declaration?
Overall view. Well, at the time we got 2 out of 3. The council had actually only gone in with the intention of finding out how many of the 310 trees that we'd agreed to be felled. So that we argued that was meaningless, because if you can sit and agree in a room that you're going to fell 150 or 100, the argument that it's last resort goes out the window.
Right.
It's not compatible. It's either you're unsalvageable or it isn't. So that was all that they were interested in. We were fighting for the fact that they wanted to fell 17,500. So for us, the 11,500 still to be felled was important, which was why we argued very strongly for the strategy.
Right.
Now, at the time, they said they were not minded to have an inquiry. So getting the 2 out of 3 that defended the street trees was important. So we didn't abandon the idea of an inquiry, but we accepted that it wasn't going to happen at that point.
Okay. So I was going to ask you what there remained to be sort of resolved after the declaration, and you sort of answered part of that because you said one of the things you still wanted was the inquiry, which is what we're doing now. But were there other things that, from your point of view, remained to be resolved after the declaration?
Well, it was actually making the declaration work,
right.
Because you don't have a declaration and then go around and then file it and then do nothing. We still had to go out with Amy in what we called the joint investigations to actually look at these street trees and argue what the possible solutions, because they'd say something and we'd say, well, why can't you do this? So there's a lot of work to do to actually make it work. And then obviously there's the strategy as well, but you've got another question on that one.
Okay. So how did all that evolve into 2019 and 2020? How did things develop? I mean, obviously the Street Tree Partnership Strategy was negotiated and agreed, but how far in 2019 and 2020 did the things you thought had been agreed and wanted to be agreed in the declaration, how far did they prove to have been agreed?
Interesting. Well, the useful thing about the joint investigations was that it informed us about what was and wasn't possible. The crew that Amy gave us were highly skillful and really up for it. They really did their best. So that was useful when it came to discussing that part of the strategy. I mean, when we all went into that room for the first meeting, I think everyone was a bit nervous. We're all people from radically different positions coming together. But the one thing that united us was none of us wanted to restart.
Okay. Okay.
So if that was the only thing we had in common, that was the one thing that we definitely didn't want to go back to where we were. So, and really, people really wanted to make it work. That was the thing.
Right. Okay.
So we did form a partnership and make this, in the end, quite remarkable thing happen.
Right. Yes, exactly. So I want to ask you now if you could summarise for us who you think suffered what harms as a result of the way the dispute was conducted.
Well, I think large numbers of people suffered. It's going to be hundreds. And it was exhausting, stressful, sometimes deeply traumatic. Some campaigners suffered breakdowns, some were treated with PTSD. But it's not just stag. Street communities were divided. There are still neighbours that aren't talking to one another following this. Tree crews were going to work in a conflict zone. They didn't have a choice not to do it. Workers from both the council and Amy were subject to denigration even if they worked in different departments, purely because of the organisation they worked for. On a more practical level, it used up public money that could have been better used elsewhere, diverted road crews who otherwise would have been used for work on pavements. On our side, people put their lives on hold, secondmen self-employed, lost income. The thing that angers me most is the colossal long-term emotional damage caused by the failure of a few to admit that they were wrong in the first place.
Okay, thank you. That was very clear, thank you. So, I want to ask you again, if you could just step back and bearing in mind everything you've learned over the last few years, if you have a theory or hypothesis from what you know now about why the dispute arose in the first place. In other words, why the council adopted an approach which attracted the opposition that it did.
I don't think the Highways Department truly understood trees. It started with 36,000 and ended it with 36,000. It was the same. You know, it didn't matter if they were different trees. It was the same. I think they just thought of them as any other type of street furniture, which you periodically replace, and new is always better. I mean, they knew that many of the trees were well into maturity and that there were few young trees, and that in time that would become an issue. And I think they genuinely saw the PFI contract as a golden opportunity to renew the street tree stock, but the contract meant that this would be done in a dramatically accelerated way. So, I mean, I may be wrong, but I'm prepared to believe that they genuinely thought that this was a good thing. The issue remains the way that the council reacted when they were told that they were completely mistaken.
Yes, okay. Again, thank you, that's very clear. Another question where I'm asking you to, if you like, tell us your hypothesis about the answer to this, which is why, given what you know now, you think it took as long as it did to resolve the dispute?
It could be a one-word answer: pride. The council wasn't prepared to admit they'd made a mistake. Not necessarily all people, but people with power over this. I believe it became personal for some people. For the sake of their own egos, they had to drive this to ever more ridiculous lengths to win.
Okay, I understand. Obviously, the Streets Ahead contract is going on, and we've got the partnership strategy, and we have to look to the future. What remaining concerns do you have? You're somebody who is very closely involved in the partnership strategy now. I know you spend a lot of time, you've made a huge personal commitment to that. But what are your current or remaining concerns?
The trees are still not valued, but despite all this, the risk of loss of parking or slight imperfections in the manifestly imperfect network are enough to consider felling. And then when it comes to finding money to save a tree, the will isn't always there, because while trees have a value, mostly it's money that isn't spent in future in terms of reduction in the impact of ill health or flooding. That value can't be cashed in, so it's not viewed as real because it's not in a budget, but the costs to save a tree are. And you know, I do understand that perspective, but it's always a challenge.
Yes. Okay, now I understand that. I think that's also clear. And sort of related to the question I just asked you, what risks are there to a re-emergence of problems in future, and what do you think needs to be done to ensure that those risks are mitigated and they don't, they don't crystallise, if you like, that we don't get a re-emergence of the dispute?
Apart from what I've just said, I'm still not seeing any real acceptance that they think that what happened was wrong. I think if someone can't admit that they made a mistake, or even understand that they've made a mistake, what stops them doing the same in future?
Yeah. Okay.
So this isn't just about trees either. I think if they can't accept having made a mistake or seek to understand it, this could happen in any other arena. So it's a general concern I have over this. But, how they can be mitigated? I think the council needs to act on this, because the thing that's remarkable about the partnership, although it can be very challenging, is that the residents have equal weight, and I think the council needs to do that. They need to be more open and transparent and collaborative with the residents. The residents have got a huge amount of intelligence and experience and expertise that they're prepared to work with the council. if they are prepared to do it, they need to step out of those and let go of a bit of power and agree a common purpose, because there's enormous potential in the city if we can just work together.
Okay. Again, thank you. So I've asked you lots of questions. Thank you for such a thoughtful set of answers. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us at this stage, or anything else you want to add?
I don't think there is, actually.
Okay.
I think I'm talked out.
Okay, great. Well, look, thank you again very much for coming and talking to me today. I really appreciate it. Okay, Charles, you can pause the recording. Thank you.